Hey, Cypher here. So I watched Frozen recently, and it got me wondering about something. You see, my generation remembers the 90s pretty fondly when it comes to Disney, but we seem to have lost something. Many people call the time period between 1989 and 1999 the Disney Renaissance. I just remember it as having a lot of good Disney movies. And so I had a very historical question on it. What made it happen? And why did it stop? And so today's episode is on the rise and fall of Disney in the 90s. So first we have to understand what this all started from. See, in the 1980s, Disney was in a pretty bad spot when it came to animation. Disney had long since ended its golden age of the 1940s to 50s. And one could point out that in 1966, Walt Disney died, and then his successor and brother, Roy Disney, died in 71. This brought on a lot of problems in terms of management, but they had been going away from animation for quite some time. They'd been going more towards live action and Disney theme parks. So by 1977, the last major Disney animated classic came out. Now sure, there was some stuff coming out in the 80s, but most of it did pretty poorly financially. It got to the point that it was so bad that the animation studio was booted out of its original building, which had been the same ever since the 30s. Many of the animators felt like they were about to be fired. And so Don Bluth led a group of 12 others to form another company under his name. They came out with movies like Secret of NIMH, American Tail, and The Land Before Time, which showed that there was still a market for animated movies, just something that Disney was not filling. What was the final nail in the animated studio's coffin was the movie Black Cauldron, which was the most expensive movie to date for Disney, and lost in the box office on opening weekend to the Care Bear movie. What a sad day that was. So, in the early 80s, new leadership was brought in, and the animation studio became estranged from the rest of the Disney Corporation. There was still love for animation, just nothing being done about it. So eventually, Touchstone Pictures was created, a subsidiary of Disney that focused primarily on live action, allowing Disney as an overall corporation to refocus on animation. And then the animation department started having new strategies to try to promote creativity. A good example was that they had a gong show where they would sit there and propose new movies, and the editors would sit there with a gong in hand and bang it if they didn't like it and immediately stop the presentation. If you made it all the way through the presentation, you were greenlit. There was also a changing of the old guard. Most of the old animators were retiring by this point, and Disney had set up its own college, and a new group of animators had come in the 80s. They faltered in their initial steps, obviously, with films like The Black Cauldron, but they would eventually get their act together. And what really saved them was Steven Spielberg coming up with the idea of working together with Disney on a movie that Disney had been hoping to make for a while, and they came out with it in 1988. It was called Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it was a tremendous success. This primed the entire animation studio to create a completely new standard in animation, and so they were ready for the Renaissance. And by 1989, they came out with the first movie of the Renaissance. That movie was The Little Mermaid. Based on a script that Walt himself had written back in the 30s, it was just one of those greenlit projects from that gong show that actually made it to full-on production. But it perfectly filled that niche that Don Bluth's company had shown was still there. Now, this movie could have easily been a single hit, but that gong show kept on going. Now, for each year, they would release a new movie. I'll go over that list later, but the next one that we're going to talk about is what happened in 1991 with Beauty and the Beast. This was a bigger success, and it actually made the critics happy. It even went all the way to the Oscars, a first for any animated feature. So now Disney had a critically acclaimed movie. And in 1994, the biggest one of the Renaissance came out, The Lion King. It broke all box office records in terms of animation. Now, from 1989 to 1999, Disney came out with a new movie every year. These movies in chronological order were Little Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Nightmare Before Christmas, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. It's a heck of a list, isn't it? So, what stopped this whole progress? Well, the easy answer is what happened in 2000 with the box office. 3 Disney movies basically flopped. Fantasia 2000, Emperor's New Groove, and Atlantis. Disney execs called it all dead and decided to start focusing on CGI rather than hand-drawn animation. In 2006, they bought up Pixar and have been making CGI movies ever since, with the exception of Princess and the Frog, which is the only other animated feature since 2000 to come out. It did pretty well in the box office, but not well enough for the studio to revive the animated department. Hence why Frozen was CGI. But I would never say that it was the 2000 box office figures that brought down Disney animation. It was a symptom of a far worse problem. It's a bit ambiguous and complex, and we need to get into some history of it, but you'll see that the simple answer is to say that it had imploded under its own weight. The first sign of the problem was with Pocahontas back in 1995. It didn't do so well in the box office, and there was a lot of people who were vehemently against the message of this movie. It had kind of a revisionist history, and we can do an entire episode on that, but there was some backlash to revisionist history at this point in the 90s, let alone the glaring historical inaccuracies. And from that point onward in the 90s, every one of these Disney Renaissance movies didn't do anywhere close to as well as The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and The Little Mermaid. In the early 90s, the entire studio felt pressure to outdo its previous successes, especially after Beauty and the Beast. So they started splitting into multiple groups and working on multiple movies. And while that sounds like a good idea, this is Disney we're talking about. It allowed for too much diversity. Disney does not do well with diversity. They need tightly controlled leadership and a very bland sense of morality in their movies. You allow the artists to go anywhere off the beaten path, people don't like it as much. Also, in the early 90s, there was a helicopter crash that took out the COO of Disney. Now, that COO had basically mitigated some of the infighting that had been happening at the top of the chain of command. This led to the leader of the animated studio to resign after The Lion King. With no oversight and a lack of leadership, Disney's movies were not ready to be market breakers. Instead, they were trying too hard to be more artsy, which Disney does not do well. And furthermore, the vultures began to circle. Pixar and Dreamworks were able to push into the market that Disney was losing. You have to remember, Pixar was a separate company at this point. And while Disney had actually created that market by bringing out things like The Lion King, they left it open after Pocahontas. So with too little focus and too much pressure, they couldn't cope with the great forces of the market, and eventually they had to fail. So Disney's Renaissance was born out of a perfect fact. Don Bluth's company had shown that there was open market there, and he wasn't coming out with enough new stuff. Disney took full hold of that and expanded the market further than anyone thought possible. But eventually it had to fail under its own weight. But maybe we're ready for a resurgence. Frozen has made over $1 billion. The real question is, can Disney actually follow suit, or will they squander the opportunity? Given how badly they have managed their properties from the Disney Renaissance, and how much Hollywood is based in nostalgia right now, I'm guessing they're probably not going to handle this success too well. But who knows, maybe we'll see another Disney Renaissance. But all this really does go to show you, even a monolith like the Disney company can fail under its own weight. It's sad to see, but we should at least be glad of the movies we did get out of it. So, thanks for watching. If you have a different idea on why Disney's Renaissance failed, put it in the comments. Hit that like button if you liked it, and I'll see you next time.